All right. Thanks for being here. Stuart Jaffe, writer, podcaster. I'm going to throw thinker in there because you're going to have to think. But when you were podcasting, what kind of equipment were you using when you were doing that?
Oh man. Well, first, thanks for having me on your show. But
Yeah.
this mic right here is the same mic I still use. I use it for doing audiobooks now. It's an old MXR. Um, that thing is, oh my goodness, very old now. It's probably 20 some years old, and it just when I started doing it, it was still pretty much an analog. They hadn't digitalized everything like the mixing boards and all, so you kind of had to patch it all together.
Mhm.
Um, and the show was a two mic show. It was me and my wife. It was called the Eclectic Review. We ran for like 6 years, and it would be the two of us. Well, it started because we had our son was like a toddler, and so it was a guaranteed way once a week we could have an intelligent conversation with each other. So we would get together and just talk about whatever subject one of us thought was interesting for the week, and then we would review movies and books and stuff like that. And yeah, so I recorded on that, and I had a Behringer mixing board, and and then that didn't have a USB. That went into an actual old um, compressor, which you can't see it, but I have an old, rack compressor. And then
Yeah.
I forget how there's somewhere along the line there's a link that to go from there was a cable that was basically like a what is it, a XLR
Mhm.
to USB or something like that. Somehow I got it into the computer. It was a real mess. And then near the end, in the final years, I upgrade. I was able to upgrade into a mixing board that was straight USB into a computer. So that's kind of how it worked.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I haven't been doing the podcasting long, but from just recording stuff or recording instruments from back in the day using track machines and tapes and things like that, that I can imagine before computers, podcasting is out of the reach of most people, I think, just because of the technical side of it. And now it's so much easier where you can get one program and pretty much do it all.
Yeah, yeah. No, there wasn't. I mean, well, podcasting itself doesn't precede computers, but before it became a popular thing where companies were like, oh, there's a market to sell to if we make it easier for people to use this stuff. We just kind of had to cobble it together, um, and it was an interesting time. I mean, everything was that way. There were like two companies services online that you could use to get your podcast into an RSS feed, and I don't even know if they exist anymore. But there was Libsyn,
Yeah.
which was Liberated Syndicate, and Blueberry was the other big one, and that
Mhm.
was it for a long time. It was kind of crazy. And then there's the good side of it, which is that it hadn't been. It's kind of like the early days of YouTube and anything else where there were no rules. So you had some of the weirdest shows out there, and anything could get heard. In fact, the Eclectic Review for the first 2-3 years, we were consistently in the top 10 of our category on iTunes and all that. I mean, which was not hard, because there was just not. I mean, and there was not that much competition. There was not that much. We had a listenership, I think, at our height of 15,000 people in a month. That was pretty typical. And then
Wow.
I to this day I still remember when I remember um, hearing that the show Battlestar Galactica was a big hit at the time, whatever years that was,
The
and they
original
started
one or the
doing
second one?
what the second one. This
You,
is the
okay. Okay.
2000 something.
Mhm.
No, the
It's
original that
back
was
to the 70s.
1980s
Yeah.
and 70s. Yeah, but no, the remake, and they started doing like a behind the scenes podcast weekly, like about this episode that was coming up or whatever, something like that. And I heard that, and I was like, uh oh, the corporate America is starting to glean onto this. And sure enough, after them, I know NPR started doing it, and other services, they all started going on, and we quickly watched ourselves drop in the rankings because there was just no way we could compete with that. And then once we were out of the rankings, your listenership, you can't find new listeners very easily. The whole thing kind of imploded um, for us. And I mean, there's obviously, and then it kind of podcasting got reinvigorated with YouTube, people doing video. I mean, back when we did it, it was everybody was just all audio. There was no video component. So yeah, it was the old Wild West days. But there was some. I will never forget. There was a podcast called King Bonk, and it was the weirdest. It was this guy. It was King Bonk's Campfire, I think, and it was this guy, and he would talk like this the whole time, like this, and he was clearly putting on a voice, and it was like it was just like whatever came out of his head, and it wasn't like a through line. He'd be telling like campfire stories in a weird way, but I don't even know. It was just so weird, but delightfully experimental. And it was like, there's no way you could do that now, I think, and have it find an audience. But back then, everyone's like, what's this? Okay, I'll listen to it. So it was kind of cool.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of what hits and what's not in the world of like viral videos. You get a couple of clips that go viral, maybe you pick up some listeners. It's easy to add podcasts to your list now, and then when the consistency goes down, or it's not every day, or it's not whenever, once a week or whenever they come out, that you then replace that with something else and you start listening to something else. But yeah, I see podcasting as basically a radio show, and then you put the video on. So it's like, to me, like WKRP in Cincinnati is basically what podcasting is. You're watching it and you're listening to it, and then you have the conversational aspect where it's just things of normal people talking about topics, and you want to feel like you're in there. You might not be able to contribute to the conversation specifically because nobody's going to hear you when you're yelling at the radio or whatever, but it does feel like, I think it gives you that human connection of, at least I know the cadence and the way to still be a part of a conversation, even if I'm not saying anything. So maybe it helps communication in the real world when you do talk to somebody that's there with you.
Yeah, yeah. And it's been like I said, YouTube was the same way in the beginning, especially where it was the Wild West and anybody could make anything. There were no rules there were no categories of what was what, right? In the early days. And frankly, what I do as a writer is the same thing. When I started out, I started writing. Oh my goodness, it's been probably 30 years now. So when I started, there was a old established way of doing it. You get an agent in my field, which is science fiction and fantasy. There are magazines. You would write short stories, build up, eventually write novels, that kind of thing. And I thought that was it. There was no Amazon. There was no other avenues. And then eventually the Kindle came around, which ebooks had existed, but the Kindle made it a viable avenue, especially. And then when they opened it up to everybody, and suddenly indie publishing became a reality, and that changed everything. And then in those early years of indie publishing with the Kindle and ebooks and all that, there were no rules, there were no rules as to what any of it had to be, what it had to be priced at, what it had to be look like. But now we've been doing it long enough that things start to kind of form their own rules, and that's true of podcasting and YouTube as well. And it's not like rules like you have to do it this way, but it's a case of, if you don't do it this way, everybody else is doing it this way, and you won't look like you're doing a good job. Your thing will look crappy. So I meet a lot of beginning authors who are like, well, how much money should I spend on this or that? And I'm like, well, your budget is your budget, but your before even having great editing, you want to have a great cover. The top, because that's the thing. Like you can look at, all of us can do this. You can look at a cover and go, "Oh, that was indie published," right? Because it looks, if it's a crappy little cheap looking cover. But if you pay for, a great artist to do something, nobody can tell my cover. Nobody looks at my books and goes, "Oh, that's an indie book," because they're professionally done. And I mean, just even this show, looking at this setup where you have a split screen and an interview going on like this, that's a mark of professionalism. That if you don't have that much and you're doing an interview show, who's going to watch it? They're like, if you don't know what you're doing now. Back in the early days, you could have gotten away with all kinds of weird stuff. So it's the natural kind of progression I've learned over watching it happen in 3 different fields that these things go through, and it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, the certain level of production on things helps because it's just that standard your eyes and ears are used to. So I can see that.
Yeah.
The Amazon, the KDP, I really like that's out there. I hope it doesn't go away ever, but it's great because it has that one place where people can go look. I mean, there's other places you can go to, but like, you're going to find something there, and then you have the easy way to publish it for people, which is good and bad because, as you said, there are things that get put out there that don't meet that minimum standard of, whether it's edited appropriately, the spelling's right, the blocking is right, or the covers are weird. And Amazon has some things figured into where it's like, no, you can't do a cover like that. It's got to be at least within these bounds, at this pixelation and all this.
Yeah,
so
yeah. But it's
there are some
very
standards.
low bar. It's a very low bar to get over.
I mean, you can find some bad books out there that are self-published, but you can also find some pretty bad books that are published by publishing houses.
Absolutely. That was kind of one of the things that we learned over the years with the indie publishing when it started to rise, is that what indie authors put out is no better or worse than what the mainstream, what traditional publishers put out. It's I always argue that it's the exact same percentages. So the percentage of books put out by traditional publishing, there's this percent that's like A-list quality, this percent that's like mid-list, and this percent that they're just making a buck and they don't give a crap about it. They're just throwing something out there, right? It's the same thing. It's just the pool of people in there is so much larger. So the sliver of A stuff hasn't actually, even percentage-wise, doesn't change. There's a huge mid-list. And then the number of people who don't know what they're doing, that are just putting out crap, it's still a percentage, but there's so many millions of books being put out now that it's a large number of pieces of crap, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the classic bell curve. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's plenty of great stuff being put out by people like myself and others I've known for years, who many of them were already published by traditional publishers before all this, and then eventually migrated to being like me. I'm a hybrid author, so the bulk of my stuff is self-published, but some of it's through publishers, more traditional publishers as well. I think most serious authors who are trying to make a career out of it, that's what I mean. When I say serious, that's what I mean. Most career authors kind of have to be a hybrid author. It's the bulk of your money is going to come from indie publishing, but you need to have a foot in the traditional space as well, whether it's small press or big press, doesn't really matter. But you need access to that larger scope of readers.
Yeah, one feeds the other, I think.
Yeah.
If you come to a publisher with a crowd, that's going to help you get the publisher. And if you go to the crowd with a publisher, that's going to help too. Like if you're doing it yourself. Yeah. I wonder how much story is lost in the world of publishing when you get so many different people looking at it and it just changes the story to a certain formula or a certain way. Like, how much of those little nuances, like, can you look at a book written by the same person that's published through a traditional publishing house and then one that's self-published and see some minor
Right.
differences?
Um, I mean, it's an interesting question, and the answer is yes. Like, there's going to be changes. So here's the example I've often um, given writers when about, like, if they're worried about that happening. And I say to them, here's the thing: when you are self-publishing, you are now the business publisher, as well as the artist, right? So you write your book, and you decide whether it makes business sense or not. You can make a decision that to publish something, even if it's not the most popular thing to publish. You can just choose to do it. Here's an example that I did. I when I was first years ago, when I was first starting out indie stuff, I wrote a YA novel, and I put it out. It's called A Glimpse of Her Soul. If anybody wants to go look it up, it's still there. And it got this was back when blogs were a thing. Blog tours for authors were a thing. So I set all these up, and I gave the people hosting it copies to read, and the reviews coming back for them were fantastic. They were like, "This is incredible. It's a great book." And I did all the blog tour stuff, and just nobody bought it. I mean, that book probably sells once a year for me. So the business side says, and I had envisioned this being a long running series and all this, and I had all these plans, but the business side of me was like, there's no money here. Nobody wants this. Even if it's the greatest thing ever, nobody wants it. At least they don't want it now. So we're not going to make it into a long series. That's a business decision I made. But I had one fan who was a close friend of my son's at the time he was in high school, and she just kept pestering every time she was over our house visiting. She'd be like, what's going to happen with this and that?" And so I finally, as a kind of a gift to her, but also to anybody who stumbles upon this book and wants to read it, I decided, knowing that this is not going to make me any money and is going to eat up time in my year, I'm going to write a sequel that just closes it out. So I did, and that book. So that series is a duology, 2 books. You get the whole story, and that's it. That's a decision I chose to do. That, had I been with a traditional publisher, that second book, under no circumstances, would have ever been published. Right. So there's one example. Another good example I often give is, say you wrote your masterpiece. You've written a beautiful book, and in the end of the book, the thing you have set up perfectly that gives the greatest ending is this big tragic death of the hero. Right? That's your book. You get a random house. It's like, yeah, we love you. We're gonna buy your book, and they do. They go through the editing process. I guarantee, no matter how much they even might agree with you that's a great ending, they're still going to pressure you to change the ending and let the guy live so that there can be a sequel. That doesn't mean that it's going to happen that way. There are plenty of authors who will stick to their guns and say, "No, I'm doing it my way." And some of those authors we've never heard from again. They got their book published. It did okay. It did well, maybe, but it never went anywhere. Occasionally, you get the outlier who sticks to their guns. The publisher begrudgingly publishes it, and it goes out there and it does so well that they're like, "All right, we'll give you some other book now. Go ahead and write something else." And I mean, that happens, but it's difficult. It's rare. So because they're in a business, they want what you're writing that makes you in an individual, but they also want to make money, and so they're not going to try and make you bend over on everything and bend over backwards on everything, but they are going to have money in mind, and sequels are important. Series are important. People love to tell you that they want standalone books, but they don't. They just don't. in general, obviously.
Yeah, because they get used to the characters, and then you want to see what
Yeah.
happens next.
Well, and we're used to stories being told that way now. We grow up with television. We grow up with the MCU. We grow up with seeing these characters return. So we're long decades and decades away from the world where it was like an author would just do, here's one story and here's a whole nother story about completely different people and none of it's connected. And and I have my mailing list and I will survey my readers every now and then, and there's always a percentage of them that say, we want more standalones, and then I go and I write a standalone and it doesn't sell. As much as y'all say, it's kind of one of those things where people they mean it. They're not lying. They mean that they think this is what they want, but they don't know what they really want. And then when given a choice, they just naturally gravitate to the thing they really want, even if it's subconscious. You know what I mean? So
yeah, it's like watching a show and you get 3 or 4 shows into it, and then you think the show is not going well, but this is a great ending. I've ended many of series like that.
oh yeah, you're just like I'm
now this is it.
Stop here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Even in movies, if you go, this is where it should end. Let's stop it here.
Yeah.
So,
that's always the mark of a. I feel bad for a series. If I've watched a whole series, you get to the series cliffhanger, and you're like, you know what? I don't really need to know anymore. I'm okay with an ending there.
I'm good. Yeah. Yeah. Or if you're reading something or watching something and it's so outlandishly ridiculous that it's out of character for that character, or they're doing something the wrong way, then you go, well, from this point forward, this is all ridiculous because it's this would not have happened this way.
Right.
The most recent thing I've seen is The Madness on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
I liked it. It definitely has messages it's trying to send out. So you got to look past that. But then it gets to a part where here's a little spoiler thing. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I saw it.
Are you watching? Oh, you're done with it then?
Yeah. I saw it.
Okay. So when the Sicario is in the wife's house and she doesn't immediately kill the wife, that's when I was like, well, this is not real.
Right.
All you have to do is kill her, wait for him to come home, kill him, and you're done.
Yeah.
We saved 3 shows. So that's, I don't know if that's bad writing, lazy writing, or if it was written a different way and some executive was like, well, we got to drag this out a little more. We need this to happen.
I mean,
so
it could be all 3 of those. And, it's hard to write screenplays. Scripts are very difficult to write. I think it's a whole, certainly it's a very different skill set than writing novels.
It's a lot of people involved. Yeah.
There are a lot more people involved. And when I write a book, what I have to the skill I have to learn to do is it's not just that I describe stuff, but I have to give the proper words. I have to use the proper words so that you will see in your mind or hear in your ear what I need you to see or hear. Okay, and and it's not going to be what I see or hear. It's just the same gist. So if I need you to see somebody break down crying, I can describe that in a way so that you see that, but it's your version of that. It's what breaking down and crying means to you, right? And it's personal and it's fine. As long as I do my job right, essentially, everybody reading the book is on the same page, even if the little details are different. But when you're doing a television show or a movie, now I'm writing cues for an actor and a director and a costume designer and a lighting designer, all these different people. I'm writing sentences that for them to get in their head what I'm trying to say. But here's where it really goes different but then they're also artists themselves. They're not just, they're going to take that line and go, well, now how do I make it mine? What do I do with, I see where Stuart wants this to go. Do I want it to go that way? Or maybe I'll turn it a little. So you start, there's a lot more chefs making the soup. and that's part of what really makes it difficult for even, I think, the best writers, and really the best screenwriters are have a skill in doing that everybody generally looks at a scene and goes, well, there's only one way to possibly do this to make this make, and but that's not, that's the top level.
Yeah.
And
And
I
that
don't
doesn't
think
mean it's
most,
going to happen that way either. Well, they'll just say this is the only possible way it can happen. But let's just say she doesn't kill the wife right now.
right,
Now
right.
what?
Well, right. So that's giving the benefit of the doubt that you're talking about the top writer, right? Right. And in reality is there's so many for all the same reasons we've talked about earlier about how art forms grow, like podcasting and YouTube and the delivery systems. We have streaming now for television. People don't generally watch television. They'd watch it on demand, and as a result of streaming, there's a gazillion shows being made at the same time, and they all need writers, and there just aren't that many great writers. I mean, even if you wanted to, it's the same thing. You want 1 million novels put out every year, we do that now, but they're not all going to be Stephen King level because there's only one of him, and that's true of film directors and true of actors and everybody involved in making these shows. They still need all, 30 to 100 people to make a show, but they can't all be A-listers. So you end up with, and in Hollywood in particular, which I've had some experience with, they really think the writer is the lowest part, partially because of what we were just talking about, where I was saying all these other artists are involved, and they're just using your script is just, for most writers, the script is just like the foundational level, the blueprint, and then everybody else is putting their own 2 cents in. So it's very easy for the script to get kind of tossed aside, the writer to get tossed aside.
Yeah. If I was doing a cartoon in a magazine about script writing in Hollywood, and from my limited experience, it would be, you have this perfect animal that is created and works how it's supposed to work, whether it's a squirrel or a rabbit or whatever. And it's just out there doing its thing. It can survive and all this. And then you say, that's the script, is this perfect bunny is the script. And now Hollywood descends and it's just all the buzzards picking it apart, doing whatever they're going to do with it.
Yeah.
So
and you also see again this evolution of, like, in the early days of Netflix, when they were the first to be like, hey, we're going to start making our own shows as a streaming service. Well, at that point, the floodgates were open, and they put up anything, right? Weird shows, or shows that would be like, okay, our season is 5 episodes, and then some other show would be like, ours is 13. But over the years, got codified. So now a season is shortest is 6, and at most it's 10 or 12. But you can tell a lot of these shows get contracted in saying you're going to do it 8 episodes. Not, this is how many episodes it took us to tell the story properly. It's, you're going to do 8. And invariably, this is I can always tell, because the show is going along, it's going great, and then like suddenly episode 6 is this weird flashback about some character's whole life that has no bearing. Like, we don't need it. It's just filler. And we're all, I mean, you're nodding like you know what I'm talking about, because I'm sure everybody knows. We've seen it so many times already. I'm like, you know what? This was a 7-episode season, not an 8 one, and they had to figure out what to do for this middle episode that they were required to put an episode in. It drives me crazy.
That is strange, because I find in writing, whether it's writing a book, writing poetry, writing a script, thinking about a series, that it presents itself in how long it's going to be. Like, here's the story, and then that's it. Certainly there's things that happen before and there's things that happen after, but for this is it. And then you have to go, oh, I guess that's the length of it. Like, you might start a book thinking it's a short story, or the other way around, and then it just turns into the other thing. But I do like how that, I wonder if that's like just the creative source that's saying, no, that this is a 3-book thing. This is however many chapters, however, is it a
Right.
300-page book? Is it a 600-page book? Are you going to separate those? And then you run into all those problems of, well, if I do 2 different ones, now I got to take up space in the beginning of the second one to catch people up and remind people of all
Oh,
this. And you're
writing
like, oh, I don't
sequels,
want to
sure,
read it
sure.
again. Yeah.
Sure. Well, and
So
I mean, again, it goes back to this. We're going to keep hitting the same cycle, but in the early days of any of this stuff, the early days of indie publishing, we quickly realized, because it was especially because at the very early days, you couldn't even get a print book made. It was really hard. It was just ebooks, and at that point, it's like, well, it's an ebook. It costs not. It doesn't matter if my book is, the equivalent of 40 pages or 4,000 pages. It's just a file, a computer file. So it doesn't cost me any more to make an extra copy. And therefore, people would just start writing stories to be the length that the story needed to be. And that's not true in traditional publishing, especially before ebooks, because they had to pay for paper. And so there were marks kind of based on genre. You were like, and it's still this case in traditional publishing. If you want to write a science fiction or a fantasy book, just a general, there's your book is expected to be within, at the bottom maybe 80, but probably like 90,000 to 100,000 words. If you're doing epic fantasy, they expect it to be around 120,000 minimum, because epic fantasy is expected to be a big honking book. And if you write if you can write that big honking book in half the space, that's not going to work. It's got to look, it's got to take up so much room on the shelf. There's all these business considerations that didn't exist for indie publishers in the beginning. And so we were able to just write a good story and let it stick at that, and not have to do what I used to have to do and other authors do, where I would write a book, for my agent to send out. And I can remember, I know exactly what I was doing. I didn't realize it at the time, but in retrospect, I realized what all authors are doing is I wrote the book and it came out to be like 75,000 words, which was too short. So I went back and I'm like, well, let me see if I can, punch up a little bit, find some places that, really fill out these characters and give more, maybe where I cut too much, I can put in some meat and really, turn it into something. I think it ended up at 90,000. But what I realized once indie publishing happened and I started being able to write books for the length that it took me to tell a story, was that I was just creating filler. And that's what the majority of authors were doing that came up short, is they were just creating filler to somehow get to that page. And once I realized that as a writer, then I can spot it now with ease when I'm reading a book, and some of them are big name authors, and you're reading it and I'm like, this book should have been 100 pages shorter. There's no need to go into this much detail about this or this much, I don't care about the waiter's life because he's, not even a main case. He's just on the page for like, 2 lines and then he's gone. But you gave me a page and a half of detail about this moron and stuff like that.
yeah, I find that most easy to pick out in like self-help books or philosophy books, because you go, well, this is half as long as what this book is we're just repeating everything now.
Right.
Like, I'd rather read it twice than have to go through the bloviating of this second half of the book, because the first half's good, and then you go, oh, goodness, what's happened here? I like the science fiction part of it for ebooks, and even in print, where the way I do them now is I like to have a chapter that is easy to read in one sitting. So not a 40-page chapter, like however long it takes to tell that little piece of the story. Some chapters longer than others, but a simple chapter. And then if you're looking at it on an ebook, you don't look at it and see 10,000 pages. You go, oh, okay, this is 300 to 600 pages on an ebook, or
Right.
usually it's around 1,000. And then you go, well, oh, this is going along pretty good. I got a second, I can read a chapter. I can read a chapter here. I can read many at the same time. And then you end up with a book that's like maybe 150 to 300 pages, but it feels different. And maybe if you stack it up in the old school way of thinking to the intellectual reading The Stand versus a person reading a thin book, then you go, oh, well, this must be the more avid reader. But I think the story is just so much better condensed, or having a way for you to visualize it that you don't need all the specifics about it. Like in Stephen King's On Writing, where he's talking about you just describe the room with a table. You don't have to say the type of table, what's sitting on it, what's
Right.
sitting on that, what's in that. You don't have to do all that. So
Yeah.
you're not writing a term paper.
Yeah. And part of it too, that when I teach writing stuff, I often say that what you write down is kind of like directing the camera in the reader's mind. So anything you make specific is like a camera zooming in on that object. And if you think about it, if you're watching a TV show or a movie and the camera, the main character walks in a room and the camera moves down to a table and looks at the table and maybe even notices the name of who made the table, that starts telling, those are clues to the viewer that this table is important. Something about this is going to be important, and they're now paying attention to that. So if you're just throwing a table in there so there's a table, then just say there's a table there. Because if you go into that detail, you're now telling the reader this is important. This is more than just a table, because I've spent half a page telling you about this table, right? And we're in a, everything you said about leading up to that, about the way you read and consume a book now is that's just kind of the way we are now. We're the way we ingest media. You go back to the late 1800s when the novel was still rather new. You go back to the times of like Tolstoy and all that. Well, that there was a whole writing movement that was like, no, I'm going to describe this table in so much detail that you will be able to actually feel the grain of the wood on your fingers. And that's what they were trying, but people loved it because why not? What else? There's no TV, there's no radio, there's no, this is the big entertainment. The whole family is going to sit around and I'm going to read out loud all this stuff. So the plot was a big part of, that's important, but all the details and all that was a huge thing. We don't really need that now. We have all different kinds of ways to get a story. So books have had to adapt, and writing styles have adapted over centuries to reach this point where we are able to just give the details you need to get you going and focus on the story itself.
Yeah, it turns out in Crime and Punishment, the crime is the detail, not the acts. Yeah. But what else are you doing? I like that. But when you read Moby Dick, you go, wow, these chapters are digestible, even though it takes me a long time to read a chapter in Moby Dick, because I'm looking up words and I'm looking up references. And then at the end of each chapter, whether it's 2 or 3 pages, I have a note card of these things that I'm going to look up and try to understand. Mm-hmm. And then I go, oh, that's a word that we don't use anymore, but I'm going to try to put that in a sentence now just for fun. And like, I don't get blankets anymore. I get counterpanes. And then you look at like this one little, if you lived back in the day and read it, you'd go, oh, okay, I get that reference. But now I got to go through 5 different things to figure out that this was just a dig at the King of England. Mm-hmm. Okay. It was just an insult. Okay. But it gives you a little better insight to it. Like, it makes you a better reader. That's what I found with reading Moby Dick, that I could read a chapter of that a day. I could read a chapter of that in a day, and then I could read a 30 to 40 pages of The Expanse, which is a whole different way to read something. And you go, wow, this is there's a difference between literature and science fiction. And then you have when you go back and read the sections of Moby Dick, you can start to see the cadence of the writing and you go, oh, there's some more thought that's gone into this than maybe contemporary writing. I don't know. It wasn't received well in the day. So then that makes me think that you're finishing up your 2-volume series is probably good, because 100 years from now, people are going to be reading that going, this is really great stuff. I'm glad that they wrote this. You'll be long gone, but at least they'll be able to finish the story. So next time when I start talking about Moby Dick and you get bored, you don't have to, end the call.
No,
I'll stop talking
I'm
about
sorry.
it.
I live out in the country, so we actually have fiber optic cables, but we're still in the country. Occasionally, we get frozen.
Mm. Do you have, what is it, IQ fiber or
I
a
have,
different type?
I don't remember what they put in. I mean, the company's Lumos, so whatever they do.
Oh, okay. We picked up IQ fiber a couple months ago, and the speed is so much different than cable was. Like, it's
Oh yeah,
stuff that took an hour to upload is done in less than a minute, and
right.
it's amazing.
No, ours is extremely fast and actually quite reliable overall. But I think probably they just, because I've had this happen before doing podcasts, and I think because we're doing audio and video and it's shooting a lot of information through that wire. I think eventually after whatever it's been, I don't know, 45 minutes or so, it's just like, why don't you take a break? Let somebody else go through.
Yeah, there's probably a program you can pay to get the priority on that.
Probably.
So
Anyway,
so then, story writing. Where do you do most of your writing now?
all over my house, everywhere but here. This is my office. This is like the last place I want to write. I'll edit in here sometimes, but this is more where I do, like, if I'm doing layouts and things like that, and other business stuff, doing a podcast. But no, I wake up in the morning. I have a little reading chair. I read a book, or read from a book, and then I do some writing in the morning. I'll write throughout the day, just wherever. I have a little laptop, and I sit down on a chair and write. And then a bunch of years back, I started having some pain in my hand, and so while I still do type, I also dictate. I have a little MP3 recorder and a microphone earpiece thing, and so when I'm feeling like doing that, I'll just have that hooked up, and I can just walk around and write. And I'll use that for when I on a trip, like I'll be doing in the upcoming weeks. I've got GalaxyCon in Richmond, Virginia, and then I have a convention in, I forget what it's called. I think it's in South Carolina, like the weekend after. So I'll be on the road for 4 or 5 hours going to these places. So I'll put that in, and while I'm driving, I'll write, and then just have the computer transcribe it, clean it up, and away we go. So yeah,
Wow.
all different places. Or tomorrow I'm having my oil change, so I will bring my laptop, and while I do that, I will write.
Do you have to put in quotations and commas and punctuation
Oh, when
in
you dictate?
that software? Yeah.
Yeah. So when you first start doing it, it's a little awkward. It takes you, it's like anything. You just kind of have to develop the skill for it. But then now I just don't even think about it. So it would be like, open quote, hi, comma, John, comma, close quote. He said, period, new line, open quote. How are you doing? Question mark, close quote. I don't even I can just do it, just like typing, right? And then and then you put it through. I use Dragon Naturally Speaking. I don't know if it still does this. I have an old version of Dragon. I have their last version before they decided to be moved to a subscription model. So now you have to pay a monthly fee. I don't know if it still transcribes or not, or if you have to pay more for that, because once they said that, I'm like, I am holding on to this. The computer I'm on right now that I'm talking to you through is old, and I am just don't want it to die because it's got the software on it, and when it goes, it's done. They have their licensed things and all that. I doubt I can get. I have the CDs and all. I think they're CDs. I have an old version of it, but I don't think it'll go on to a new computer ever again. But anyway, I have that. That does the transcription, and it does a really good job overall. And then I just go through it, clean up any mistakes, especially, or I'll do a find and replace because I'm writing a lot of fantasy and science fiction. People tend to have weird names. So what I learned early on was that transcription software, you can kind of train it to recognize a weird name, but it's not worth it. It's much easier to just use a name like Peter and then find and replace Peter with, whatever, Pathul. And then I'll put that in. It's just much easier to do it that way. So I'll clean up things like that, which is fine with me because doing that cleanup gives you kind of an editorial pass at it. So when I'm finally finished with a book that I dictated, it's already mostly clean and very close to ready to go because I've already done a bunch of editing on the way.
Do you set time aside every day to write, or do you go by topic or word count, or how do you
So when I am
when to
writing,
start and stop?
so when I'm actually in a book, writing a book, I'm writing a book right now. So yeah, I have my morning time is the time to get started. So that no matter what else happens in the day, I at least got some words written. So I wrote this morning, and it's the time when everything's quiet. My wife sleeps in, so I have the house to myself, and so I get writing done. And then I also tend to write before I go to bed because again, it's quiet. there's nobody making demands of me. And then anytime in between, if I can get the time and I know what I want to do, then I'm going to write. Otherwise, today's a busy day. I knew I was doing this interview. I had various things this morning. When this is done, I have some things I got to go do. I don't know if I'm going to get any more writing done than the what I did this morning, but I have a deadline I got to meet. So that's going to always be, that's the pressure. Is I've got. It's a good pressure to have, which is that I have fans and they want the next book, but it means I actually have to deliver too.
Do you take notes during the day, like when you're doing something else and you have like a line or an idea that comes to
No,
mind? Do you do that?
I mean, and I've lost a lot of good lines that way over time. Uh, um, I'm a plotter, so I have that all worked out, and I have in my head what I know. Like I know the next scene I actually have to write tonight. I know what it's going to be because I have it plotted out. I don't know how it's going to work. Like the plot is, says, oh, these two characters are going to meet, and they're going to discuss X, Y, and Z. That's what I have to accomplish. Now, the nitty gritty of that is a whole nother thing that I got to figure out. And so I'll be thinking. I mean, on and off, I'll be thinking about it throughout the day and getting a clear picture. But no, I'll just eventually, when I get time to write later today, I'll sit down and I'll start working towards it and trying to make it happen. And it's been on my mind throughout the day, both consciously and subconsciously. I'll have some idea of where I'm going how I'm going to achieve that. But that's everybody's different. Everybody's got to find where they are on the spectrum between being a plotter and being whatever you want to call it, a pantser or discovery writer. But I think we all are somewhere on the spectrum. And for me, I want to have the thing plotted out. I want to know it works. I want to know where I'm going. I want to make sure I hit all the right points. And then the actual writing of each chapter that makes that happen, I want the freedom to let things be discovered, let the muse hit me. But at the same time, excuse me, when I wake up in the morning, I can look at my outline and go, here's what I have to write today. I don't have to sit there and look at a blank screen and go, well, where's the book going? I already know where it's going. And I know chapter by chapter how I'm going to get there. I just don't know how that chapter is going to achieve the thing I told it to achieve. And I've done that many times where I'm like, I wish I had written more. Like sometimes I'll have whatever, chapter, 35, they fight, hero wins, and I'm like, okay, great. That doesn't tell me how the fight's going to happen. Now I got to figure that out and make it work. And yeah, but that's fun.
Does it happen often where you have your outline and then things unwind differently? The characters say or do different things, and then you
Sure.
have to move it around. Okay.
Sure. But I mean, the outline is not set in stone. It's not a hard, it's the outline is like, I would say if you're a pure discovery writer, you just sit down and start writing a book. And you write the book, and either you write to the end and then you're like, oh, now I know what the book is about. And you go back and heavily edit it to make it be that. Or I know some who will write a little bit and go back and fix that and then write a little more as they discover and discover. All an outliner is doing is they do all that discovery writing without writing all the individual thousands and thousands of words, right? I just write little lines until I have, so I might take 3 or 4 stabs or however long it takes me till I have a complete outline. And then now I have a chapter by chapter outline, and I know the story works at least like this. And then I start writing. And as I'm writing, I've already expressed my first ideas of how this is all I'm gonna get from point A to point Z in my outline. But as I'm going along, some characters you think are just going to be throwaway, stick. They're more interesting than you thought they were going to be. Some characters you planned to survive the whole thing and then they die. And sometimes, when I write mysteries a lot of times, so sometimes a clue pops up that I wasn't expecting, and it's one of those cases, where your Sicario example from way back in this conversation. So something would happen to me is I would be like, well, of course he's going to kill them right away. And that's what I would have written. And then as I'm writing the book, I'm like, it may come up, I may realize, oh, but maybe there's a good reason that he doesn't kill this person this one time. And now I need to, for some reason, he doesn't want to do it. And now I need to explore that. And by having an outline, I can then sit there and go, okay, I can stop and think and be like, well, does this make sense? And I can be like, no, Sicario is going to do what he's going to do. And he kills him and I can stay with my script. Or in a less crazy kind of choice, I might be like, oh, you know what? This character could go off here, but I know where I need to get ultimately to. So I have a roadmap to get back on. It's just a detour instead of, oh, now we're going to go to a completely different story. I'm still got the story I want. On a few occasions, it's changed the ending dramatically, but it's still ultimately going towards the same goal, and that's, I think, one of the advantages of plotting.
Yeah, I see the outline as a map, and then you can take different directions to get there. But if your plan is to end up in, Carlsbad, you're going to end up in Carlsbad,
Right?
Barring something crazy. And then with the Sicario example, if there is a good reason, okay. If a good reason pops up, or even if it's good enough, okay. But if it's just bad, then that's just bad.
Well, yeah.
It's how much was it? Is it a different way of thinking versus typing or writing versus the voice to text? Like I've never done the voice to text, so I'm thinking.
So yeah. The biggest difference, or the thing that took me a time to wrap my head around, is that because we read text books and we write them and we're typing them that way, you don't realize you've done this But when it comes to pacing, you can, as a writer, you can look at it, and even as a reader, I can look at a page of text without reading the text, just looking at how the words appear on the page and get a feel for what the pacing of that is going to be. And when I'm dictating and I'm driving a car or I'm walking around my house dictating, there's nothing to look at. And so initially, I started realizing I have no idea if these paragraphs are too long or too short, or if the pacing is, this is an action scene. Is it actually going? Is it going well? Is it too, and I don't know whether I've dictated a page and a half, 10 pages. I didn't have a feel for it. I've done it enough now that I have a feel. I know now what I'm doing. But that was something I really had to. That was one of the things that really jumped out, where I'm like, oh, this is a whole different feel of it. Other aspects, just describing a room or something is just describing a room. It's no different. That didn't feel any different. And then dialogue, for me, I have a theater. I have a theater background. My undergrad was in theater, so I actually started out writing plays before I ever wrote prose, and so I've always been very comfortable writing dialogue and letting that do its thing. And so when I'm dictating, it's kind of like just acting out a scene in a play. So it's very easy for me. I don't. Your mileage may vary, but that one for me didn't cause me any problems.
Yeah, what a great explanation. And I wonder if the explanation was so great because you're used to explaining it by talking it through rather than typing it through. Can you tell the difference when you talk to a writer that does the voice to text versus one that's just typing, like in conversation?
I haven't, so I guess the answer is no. I haven't been able to
Oh,
notice that.
I would
It's
think
not
that
something
the person
there's
that
very few
does,
authors I know. I know authors do it. Plenty of authors do it, and most of my books are a mix, right? I might in the morning I'm not going to be talking out loud while I'm waking my wife up, so I'm going to be typing, and then it might be in the afternoon that I'm dictating, and then in the evening I may be typing again. And so it's a matter of.
do you find that they look different on the page? Do they feel different when you go through them,
I
or?
don't think so because, well, first of all, got to understand, I'm old. I've been doing this a long time,
Right.
so even dictating, I've been doing for close to a decade now. So maybe in the early days, that would have been noticeable, but I can't tell where. Like if I look at an old book of mine, I wouldn't be able to know where one started and the other stopped. Um, it just
That's an interesting thing to think about. Like I feel like, especially if you're teaching things, that you could really figure out, because it's a stylistic thing of this person writes by dictation versus this person writes by, and maybe because it's mixed, it flows together better. But I've been in writing groups before where people bring in a sample and they're the voice to text using Dragon, and they didn't have a grasp on it yet. Like they
right.
must have just started doing it. And
Well,
I
they
don't know
also have to
how
have a
good a
grasp
writer they
on.
are otherwise.
They also have to you have to have a grasp on actually how to write a book and as
Yeah.
well. And then ultimately, even though I dictate, even if I dictate 90% of a book, I still have to edit the book, and that's going to be done. You know, that's not going to be done through dictation. That's going to be done on a computer, or I'll also do it by hand. I'll print out the whole book and make actual physical notes in it. So if for some reason that difference in pacing that I was talking about is obvious, it'll get ironed out and smoothed out in the editorial process, because I'm going to be cleaning it up one way or the other. I'm on some level, my brain's going to be like, that doesn't look right. Let's fix this.
Yeah, I wonder if that part of your brain is the writer, the typing part taking over that voice part. I I just
I,
feel like it. I'm not saying it's good either way, like good or bad either way.
right.
I
No,
just think
no,
it's
it's different.
interesting that you could be able. It's the difference between jelly and jam, you know, that you could look at something or read it and then go, this is something someone read, like a villain that is just typed out villain versus a villain that you're talking about,
Yeah.
like you're saying the lines when you're walking through the house. I feel like it would be maybe not super noticeably different, but I wonder, are there those little nuances that change it around? I don't know. And maybe because you've been doing it so long, it just blends into each other. When you're typing, do you read it to yourself out loud, like a scene after you type it and then you go,
Um,
okay, let's see if this
Not
sounds
when
right.
I'm typing it, no, but I do. One of the edits I do is I read my book aloud to my wife. Um, and reading a book out loud is extremely helpful for just for finding mistakes alone.
Yeah.
Um, that's a great way to do that. And you hear things. You hear things like
Hmm.
that. There's no doubt that there are lines that read really well. You type them really well, and then when you actually try to say them out loud, you're like, "That's a mess." That
Mm.
is, there's, it looks fine, but it does not fall off the tongue, and so I'll fix those. Um, Here's something I can tell you that I know is a difference. Actually, is and this isn't I should this is not a difference between dictation and writing itself as much as a difference between the initial writing and people who don't read their work aloud ever, is that they will have a word repeated uh, within
Mm.
sometimes within a sentence, and certainly within a paragraph, and and it might be repeated 3 or 4 times.
Mm.
Um, and when you read it out loud, you're like, why am I keep saying that same word? Obviously, there are words that we don't worry about, things like that.
Right.
But if you sat there and you said, I don't know, the spaceship docked in the spaceship port, for example,
Yep.
you could type that and it would seem fine, and you could read it and it would seem fine. But when you say it out loud, you're like, oh, that sounds weird saying spaceship twice. Um, so I'll find those things and fix them and make a different, use different words, and so that's kind of a smoothing thing. Or you might say, or you'd have the spaceship docked in the spaceship port. Commander Jones walked through the spaceship to his, and you used it a third time, literally that close together. You don't even know you're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
That's a great thing to clean up. If you read it out loud, you'll be like, oh, why am I doing this?
I notice that a lot when I read, and also if I'm in a writing group, looking at somebody else's thing,
Mhm.
because I'm so worried about doing it myself that I go,
Right,
I got to have a different word there. And I think a lot of that comes from poetry, where I don't want to repeat lines or rhyme words with the same word, or even have, if it's a unique word, I don't want it twice in the whole poem. There's no
right.
reason to put it in there. But yeah,
Yeah.
it, like in a book, I can remember I read a zombie apocalypse book, and the guy used the word trundle so much that I was like, man,
Yeah.
there's other
Well, and
words that
so
you can use a lot, but trundle
right,
is a unique word.
and so there you're leaning into something beyond just the using a word like within a sentence or two. But when then there are what we call crutch words, right? A word that you're like you might have shrugging, a character shrugs, right? And then you just might start putting that in, not realizing you're doing it. You're just putting it in as filler because you don't know what to put in there. So everybody suddenly shrugging throughout the whole book. And the thing that sucks about crutch words is once you recognize that you're doing this, then you'll fix it, and some other word will take its place. There, you can't get rid. You will always have a crutch word, and it's a matter of figuring out what it is for that book, clean it up, and then the next book it'll be something else. And one great way to notice them is again reading it out loud. But yeah, crutch words are a pain, a pain. Um, and they
Even
just
when
always
people
have.
are, if I'm taking a class and somebody starts saying the same word over and over again, usually it's the uhs and whatnots
Right.
that then it becomes less about me paying attention to the class and more about how many times are you saying this word, because I'll keep a tally of it. And I remember in the academy, I turned in a review because you have a review for each class. And it was, the class was okay because I followed along in the outline, but you said 54 times in 10 minutes. And then I stopped counting. I stopped listening. I was paying attention to something else. So
Right.
I mean, that's good feedback. And one of the best classes I ever had was a public speaking class way back at the beginning of college. And all we did was do 5-minute speeches, and the teacher would stand in the back of the room. And every time you did, he would do it exactly like louder towards you.
Uh-huh.
So you go, from the back of the
Right,
room, and you
right.
go, okay.
Yeah, and people don't realize they're doing these verbal films.
Yeah.
You also, the other thing is, if you get rid of those crutch words and you get rid of those repeated words, then it opens up the possibility, if you like to write this way, which I do, is purposefully repeating a word or a phrase, right? So then what happens, more often subconsciously than consciously, but the reader, because you're not doing all these kind of bad things to do in your writing, they start to trust you. And then when you do some kind of repetitive thing, they know it's there on purpose, and it has you're doing it for an effect, for a reason. And so again, conscious or subconscious, depending on the reader, they start to be, you can use that to like focus that person into a thought or a moment or whatever you're trying to, guide them to think. When you have control over the language, which is what our job as writers is to do, is to control the language to manipulate our reader into experiencing something. When we have control over every little word, then we can use repetitive words, sometimes in a same sentence, as to almost in a poetic repetition. But also,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm sure you have, and any reader has had this, where if you've ever read a book and at the end, the character, whatever, says, or the character puts on a blue cap with a white stripe. And that has huge, you read that and you're like, oh my goodness, that connects with the thing from the very beginning of the book. And you're like, as a writer, I remember when I was a young writer going, how did, it's a 400-page book, how did I remember that one detail when I can't remember most of the details in the book? And that's one of the ways the author does it, is that because we're not accidentally repeating stuff, then that description of that cap is probably word for word the same as it was in the beginning, because if it's not mentioned anywhere else. And that use of repetition, even just once, can make your brain click in a way that wouldn't happen if throughout the whole book I'm absently just repeating shit. Then your brain would have been like, well, I don't need to pay attention to things.
It's one of those things when you hear writers say, well, I've gone through every sentence in this book. All those words are there for a reason. And you're like, yeah, whatever. And then you write a book and you go, oh man, I've been through every word of that book and they're all there for the same reason, for a reason. And the reason you notice the blue hat with the white stripe is because they didn't explain anything else like that. So they didn't waste your time explaining the table and everything on it.
Right.
Like,
we drew your attention to something. And that's just one of many. There are a lot of ways you can make somebody remember something, but that's one of them. And it's one that you throw out even if you do it like you're saying, even if you explain it real clearly compared to other things. But if you abuse repetition, or if you are explaining everything in detail, then you make it so that that's not effective. So you have to,
too much noise.
You have to know exactly. So you have to know the tool to use and then how to use it.
And that drives you crazy when you're reading something, or if you're watching a show and they do things like that and you go, look, there's no reason for you to put that in there. I know there's not a reason because you've done it 3 or 4 times before on other things, but we'll just see. We'll just see if there's a reason for this. And you get to the end of it and no, it's just,
there's no reason.
Why'd you put that in? Is it filler? Is it just something that you cut out, or what's going on? But
the
yeah, that
opposite
drives
of
me
that
crazy.
happens too, where an author or a screenwriter over explains something. Like they're so afraid that they either don't have the skill or that you're too stupid to get that the hat with the blue stripe needs to be remembered, that they keep
Mm.
bringing it up. And then at the end, when he puts the hat on, there's a quick flashback to the moment where from the beginning.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, dude, we got it. And if we didn't get it, this is insulting that you're doing it this way.
Yeah.
If we didn't get it, you screwed up earlier. So that kind of stuff drives me crazy.
That's why I don't like reading series books that aren't put together well, because you end up reading it probably in a 100,000 word book. You end up reading 10,000 words that were in the previous book the very same way, because they're just trying to make those connections. And you're like, no, 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 no.
Yeah,
Do
they do
these a
that too
better way.
much.
Yeah.
That's I mean, it's so this series, the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries, is now 19 books long. And so I've learned something, which is that, you're writing the first book of a series, your first book ever, whatever. You're writing your first book of something. There is a million authors who will tell you how to write a book, how they did it, things to avoid, things we're talking about right today. Then you go to write book 2, and there's still a lot of authors, but not as many, who can help you figure out, well, how do you navigate the opening chapter where I need to get people up to speed, especially people who never read book 1, because there are psychopaths who will start at book 5. They don't care that they don't have to read in order. So those people still need to be brought up to speed, but we don't want to bore everybody who already knows all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then you have to learn how to do that. Then you get deeper. You get into books 5, 6, and 7, and you need to refer to something from book 2. But again, you don't want to write 10,000 words on it, and you just need to. How do I do that in like 2 sentences or a paragraph? And when you're at that, there's far fewer people who have made it to book 5 or 7 in a series as authors to give you advice, but still quite a lot. Well, I wrote book 19 earlier this year, and I quickly found there are very, very few people to really help you navigate how to write a long running series. There are plenty of people now, because of ebooks, that have written like series that has 50 books, but they're all like, 20-page books. And they're not, but to actually have a long running series that's run, this series is run for 12 years. I'm friends with, I've got a couple friends who are New York Times bestsellers who have long series, and I lean on them, and I'm like, what do you, and they're just leaning on me, because I'm at 19, the one is at like 20, the one is at like 15. We're all just feeling it out and trying to figure out, how do we keep this thing, satisfying and fresh. And it's hard. And the guideposts are very few. Even if I can go back and read other series from long ago that have lasted that long, but they're not that many, especially the further you go back, because long running series were not popular, in 1970 compared to today.
Yeah, I think one of the best ways I found is you either do a map, or you do some pictures, or you do a family tree. You do something to where people can refer to it and go, okay, this person is this person. So you might not have to tell all the relations in the
Well,
second or subsequent books.
certainly the logistics of it is an issue, but just uh, how do you actually write? I'm going to be writing book 20 later this year. How do I write? It's not just there's all these aspects of what do I refer to and what don't I. But by book 19, I understand how to do that. That I learned around book, from 2 to 5, how to do that. But how do I write the 20th book in a series, just so that it still delivers, so it's still interesting, but it's not becoming um, rote for both me and the reader, where it's like, oh, it's a weird thing, because readers expect certain, in a long running series, there are certain things that I have to do. Like if I don't do them, the reader's going to be disappointed that this character didn't say their famous, their catchphrase, or this character didn't do what they always do. So I got to do those things are kind of baked into a series, right? But at the same time, I have to keep it fresh. Otherwise, it becomes boring. So it's this weird juggling act that I never had experience in it. I've written a lot of different series over the years, but a lot of them end. Like the Mahler Chronicles is 6 books long and it's over. This is the only series I've ever had that goes this long. So each book is a new thing of like, okay, how do I do this again and keep readers happy and yet not be boring? And
a formula without a formula.
Yeah, it's what you have to do, and it's actually TV is a great place to learn from, because they tend to have that, or they can, like a show like Supernatural, which ran 15 seasons. If you start watching through that show, I mean, every show, there's certain things though the brothers are going to do, or if there are certain characters who appear, they're going to say a certain thing. It's going to happen. It has to. Otherwise, everybody would like, but he didn't say the thing. He's got to say the thing, right? But at the same time, somehow it feels fresh, and navigating that and figuring it out and then implementing it. Those are the challenges that I've been facing now.
It's like you almost need a coming on to your book for the second and subsequents, like a TV show has its coming on, like South Park, where you have the first season has whatever it has in there, and then the next season has whatever was in the first and the second, and then every show builds on. You end up with Barbra Streisand, Monster in the background, and the town's on fire, and all these callbacks for all these shows.
Well, right. But then you also have to, at least in books, and this can happen in shows too, is one thing I'm actively trying to avoid is what I call Supergirl syndrome. In the show, when the most recent version of Supergirl started a bunch of years ago, it started out and it was really cool. I thought it was a really, really well done show. And she's working as a magazine reporter and trying to hide her identity and all this. But then eventually, like by season 2, somebody knows who she is. And eventually, like 3 people know who she is. And then soon it's no longer a big thing to keep secret. But now, wait, by season 7, some so-and-so also has superpowers. And this by the last season, like everybody has superpowers. Everybody knows who she is. It's absurd. And it's just gone so off. And it's like they can't even control the monster they created. So I'm trying very hard to make sure that while I have to keep creating something new and interesting, or a new angle on, for example, the magic and the paranormal aspects of the story, I don't want it to become a thing where it's just not even a shadow of what started, because there's some magic, there's some thing about what started that gets people to want to read all 19 books. And if I break that, it will eventually just fall apart. And that's it's a very easy thing to break, as the Supergirl example. And you can think of countless others where, it started out here and they just started every season. They're like, well, let's just add this in. Let's just add this in. And if you just keep adding, it becomes a slop. So it's like, how do I add in, but take away, but balance? There's
no outline for 4 seasons down the road.
There's so few people that I can talk to who've done it. And first of all, there's a small number of authors who've actually done it, period. And then you have to have ones who've done it well, and that's even smaller. And, and I'm trying hard to be one of those people who've done it well. But it's a crazy thing, but it's also exciting. It's part of what makes me enjoy still writing this series, is that, anytime I write any book of any series, I want to have a challenge. And first book's, the challenge is easy. Can I write the first book of this series? But you want to have something. that's more than just writing the story, because I've written over, I don't know, 70, 80 books by now. I know how to write a book. It's like we keep talking about writing a room. When you're a new writer and your first time you're writing, a character walks into a room, that's a real problem. How do I describe this room, right? What do I describe the table? Don't I? All these questions. I have written somebody walking into a room probably thousands of times if you include all the short stories I've written. I mean, just ridiculous number of times I've written, and all the stories I've thrown out and nobody's ever seen, right? It's just, you write tons of it. I could do it. I could make something up right now and just improv. It's so easy to do because it's muscle memory. I've just done it over and over and over. I don't even have to think about it. When I sit down to write tonight, if they walk into a room, which is very possible, I could describe the room in like 2 sentences, 3 sentences that give you everything you need, and we'll just move on. And I won't even think about it. I will tonight because we're talking about it, but normally I won't think about it. But when you get to this, so I'm always looking for a challenge. But the challenge in this series, every book now, is like, how do I do this again? How do I do? I've yet to reach a point where I'm like, okay, now I know how to write a long running series. What's the next challenge? Because so far, at least, and maybe by book 30, I'll be like, okay, from 20 to 30, I was learning how to write a long running series that's ridiculously long. Now what? Hopefully it will go that long if people keep buying it and wanting it. But
do you have like an end in sight, whether it's 200 books or 50 books?
For this series, no. So I can. There are many books. I'm writing a science fiction series right now called The Pathway Ring. I'm in the middle of writing the second book in that series. That is going to be 4 or 5 books, depending on how long it takes me. But it has an end, and specific end that I'm working towards. This is it's intentionally an open-ended thing. It's here are the characters, and this is each book is a new mystery, a new case they have to solve, and especially so artistically, it's set up to just go as long as as I desire, and as a business thing, because it's my most successful series, and it's literally half my income of my writing income is this series. So I have a lot of fans who will send me emails or on Facebook or whatever, and they'll be like, is there going to be another one? I'm like, as long as you all keep buying them, you keep enjoying them, I'll keep writing them, because I figure if I ever get to the point where it becomes rote, it becomes the same thing over and over and over again, they'll let me know, both, reaching out and saying this is getting boring, or the sales are just going to drop, and I'll be like, okay, that's done. The masters have spoken. That's all the business cap, non-artistic side of being an indie author. But it's intended to just keep going as long as they'll let me.
It reminds me of shows like the problems they would have with In the Heat of the Night, where every show somebody gets killed in Sparta, and then you're like, man, how long are we going to do this? 'Cause you're going to run out of people here.
So that was an early on thing, is that I quickly tried to figure out, well, how do every case can't be a murder mystery. There's other kinds of mysteries. So I've worked hard. I mean, plenty of people die, but I've worked hard to have them be about other things, whether there's an early book that's about art forgery, and there's a book, different issues. And because I'm dealing with these are mysteries that take place. I live in North Carolina. They take place in North Carolina, and I take real history of the area and mix it with witches and ghosts and magic. So because I'm dealing with ghosts and magic, there are other things. It could be not that somebody's murdered, but somebody has a curse on them, or their house is haunted, and we're trying to fix that issue. And then because I'm dealing with real bits of history, there's lots of stuff that I can work with there, then pull from, to help ground everything, but also not make it always be the murder of the week.
Yeah, and I think if you expanding the universe of it makes you have more options too. Like if you can do it North Carolina, if you can maintain in North Carolina, you probably do that for as long as you want. But he can always go to Paris, and take a trip to
Well,
Australia. Yeah.
so that right, but you have to be careful. This is kind of going into the Supergirl thing. So this series is set up specific in a very specific part of North Carolina in what's called the Triad, and it spreads out a little bit, but it's all about North Carolinian history, North Carolina culture, and mixing that with magic. If I start going all over the world and globe hopping, it becomes about something else, and it's no longer and the fact that it's specifically about real North Carolinian history is one of the few things that makes it different from all the other ghost detective series out there, and there are tons. Okay, I mean, it's not that. I mean, it's true of anything, right? Nothing's original. So, what makes it a differentiator? One of them is that. Another big differentiator is the fact that Max Porter is married, and he and his wife have a healthy, loving marriage. So he doesn't have a new girl every book, like a hard-boiled Mike Hammer kind of character. He's loyal and devoted to his wife, and she is to him, and that will not change. They're never going to get divorced. They're never going to cheat on each other. That's that. I hate using the word wholesome, but that wholesome marriage thing is that coupled with where it's located. Those are the two key things that really make it different from all the other possible paranormal mystery series out there that you could possibly be reading. And tons of them are out there that usually are, some young gal who's love triangle and all that kind of stuff. And that's, I don't say that as a criticism. Those do very well. People really enjoy those books, and when they're done well, they can be fantastic. But that's not what I'm providing. So I'm hitting.
I mean, it is the Triad in Carolina. High country, low country, all the intrigue. What's the best way for people to be able to find your work and follow it?
Oh, sure. Well, I know this is going to become a shock, but I have a website, and it's called stuartjaffe.com. I'm on Facebook. It's just Stuart. I think it's Stuart Jaffe author. I'm sure if you just put in Stuart Jaffe, I try and make it easy. My books are available in just about every form you could want. So ebook, paperback, most of them are into hardcover now, and almost all of it is an audiobook. I make it as easy as possible for you to enjoy. And I don't go exclusive. So it's not just on Amazon. It's all over whatever service you like to use, it's there for you.
All right. Maybe a thought for closing, unless you have something else you want to talk about.
No, I've really had a good time chatting with you. So my thought is just thank you. Go out and if you like reading, obviously I want you to read my books. But if my stuff doesn't interest you, find what does and just read. Just support authors so that we can keep doing this stuff. You will always be able to read more than any single author can write. I never mind pointing you to other authors, because as many books as I have out there, and if you love my writing and want to read all of them, thank you very much. But you will still get to a point where you're going to have to wait for me to write the next one, because I can't write as fast as you can read. So, there are tons and tons of great authors out there, especially in the indie world. If you like science fiction and fantasy kind of stuff, you should be reading Darren Kennedy and John Hartness and David B. Coe and AJ Hartley and Faith Hunter. And I'm just trying to name drop a bunch of people that I want to help support. Chris Jackson, there's another great one, and Eric Asher. And of course, I realize as I start doing this that I'm going to have a ton of my friends being like, how come you didn't mention me? But those are the ones off the top of my head. James Maxey. I'll end with Dragon stuff is James Maxey. So
just put a list on your website of people you would
It would
recommend,
be
and
an
you can cover them all.
I know so many authors. That's kind of the cool and bad part of being an author is you just end up knowing all authors.
What are the 3? I mean, it could be more, it could be less, but what are some of the most important things you've learned from writing that writing has taught you?
Oh my goodness, taught me. To be a full-time author requires, above all, well, two things. It requires self-discipline, and I guess to some extent you either have that or you don't, but it is something you can also learn to have. And so I've had to learn to have that, and then that then spreads out and affects the rest of your life. And the other thing, and most people don't really realize, is you have to be very comfortable living with uncertainty. I don't know how much money I'm going to make this month, this day, this week. I don't know year to year what's going to happen for me. So, and I have no control over. I have no control over how many people are going to want to buy my books. So you have to be comfortable with that and learn how to prepare for that. And that definitely is useful in life. Yeah, because people think life is certain, but as you know, as we all found out when COVID happened, things can go, the whole system can become suddenly different. And I had, relative to a lot of people I knew, that whole experience in 2020 was not that big of a deal to in terms of disrupting my daily life, partially because I was a full-time writer, so I'm home anyway. But in terms of like people freaking out, going, "What's going to happen tomorrow?" And how are we going to handle? And I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow either, but I'm used to that. And so I know you asked for 3, but there's 2 things I've definitely learned from having a full-time writing career.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, your website is in the show notes. So if people want to check it out there and they forgot what it was, they can go there and click on it. And good talk. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah,
and
thanks again for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit here.